welcome, everybody to another edition of Hot Program. I am your host with the most, all the way from the East Coast. And as always, good people, I am in airplane mode, and now a man who may have inadvertently taught his baby that passing gas is a form of communication. Which, let's face it, if in the age of the internet, it just might be.
It might be, yeah.
A man who needs no introduction.
Hey, Pocket Locker, happy Sunday. How are you?
Happy Sunday, man. How are you? I'm hanging in there. I made it. I made it through another week. I sound like a church person. You know, you get to church. I made it. To be in the house of the Lord one more time.
Testify, Pocket Locker.
Oh man.
I'm doing okay over here. This has been a very expensive weekend. Just like the money's going the opposite direction. I wanted to flow in. It is flowing out like crazy.
Yeah, where are you? You're in Indiana right now?
I'm back in California in my house. So we're prepping it for sale. The landscaper was here yesterday. They're coming back on Thursday. The painter was here yesterday. He's coming back on Monday. And there's this tearing out of the old and putting in some of the new, and painting over things. And
oh, so that's where all the money's going, fixing up the house for sale.
Yeah, and then I had an electrician come to help me with my truck, and we realized it appears that my wiring harness, which was $300 and fancy, is missing a plug that I desperately need in order to make the vehicle even work. So he got paid $225 to watch me be upset for a few hours. He fixed other things.
And then the question for most people is, do you have a way of knowing that the money you're putting into fixing up the house is, worth it? Like, is it going to increase the value of the house enough to make all that?
That's a fabulous question. And the answer is none of my budget's like $5,000. None of it will increase the value of the house, in my opinion. None of it.
Okay.
But why I'm spending it is to speed up the sale of the house. So I'm doing like curb appeal things on the outside and just painting on the inside.
I see.
So the wow factor is there. And that might get people to buy the house sooner. Now, how does that translate? Well, we can say if I'm paying interest on my loan, I'm paying interest on I got a $417,000 loan to buy the house or whatever. So I'm paying interest on that. So if my house sells 30 days faster, then I save money on that interest, which is probably, I think it's like $900 or something like that.
Okay.
I'm saving if I do that. So that you can say, okay, well, you do get a little bit back.
But it's about selling it faster, not necessarily increasing the ticket price. Okay.
No.
Okay.
I do plan on, all these home renovation shows where house flippers are doing things. We're not doing that sort of thing. We're not making dramatic changes. As my brother said to me, a poor person isn't going to buy your house. A wealthy person is. And they may not necessarily like your taste as to how I've redecorated things for the sale. He goes, so don't do any of it. Don't spend any of that money. Just put it up for sale. And so what I decided to do, I'm going to take that advice and I'm going to raise my price a little higher than I think it should be. That way, when they say, well, the place hasn't been updated, I'm going to give them my smart ass answer. I'm like, it absolutely has not, because I like it the way it is, but now that I'm selling it to you, things you don't like, you can put your spin on them without having to raise my price to pay for it to do what you don't like.
Now, what's
right?
also sad is I gotta hit you with the. Did you remember to remove all the pictures of black people to make sure? Because that was like a real thing that they discovered, right?
You have to remove the my realtor. She said remove all photos.
Now,
I have
see,
all photos.
that's the way to do it. The way to do it is
Hmm.
just tell everybody remove. Don't want to come there and see your family in the house and with your family memories and your descendants. They
Yeah,
want to imagine their own. So just everybody, regardless of who you, everybody, just yeah. I like that approach. But yeah,
yeah.
just amongst us black folks, you gotta do what you gotta do
Well,
what you gotta do.
I was a semi-pro photographer for a while. I have lots of really beautiful pictures, and I had a few of them hanging up, like stuff you'd put in a gallery.
Yeah.
Um, and those are coming
They
down
got to
too.
go too. Yeah.
And they're
Yeah.
poster size. They're not little. They're poster
Right.
size coming
Yeah.
out.
Coming out.
And
All right. Well, Andre said, don't forget to paint over the pentagrams on the floor. You know.
that has carpet on top of it.
Yeah. Yeah. Also, when the
Gosh.
when the when the when the when the li- when the girlfriend that became the fiance, that's now the wife, came to the land of my one black friend. The carpet's been in there for a while. That's all I'm saying. The carpet, when the Christian moved in, the carpet had the carpet had to go down a while ago. Before we
Yeah.
decided to sell the house, we had to cover up the pentagrams.
So okay, that reminds me of a conversation this morning. Uh, my wife, daughter, and myself, we FaceTimed my mom, and my mom loves to sing to my baby, and she loves it. She's now almost 8 months old. She loves it, and my mom starts singing like songs about Jesus and stuff like that. And my wife was looking at me like, "Oh, how's he gonna react to this?" And I say to my daughter, "I'm gonna tell you about Jesus in the Bible later." And my mom says, "Oh, did you start believing again?" And I go, "Nope." So the time is going to come where little Victoria Marie is going to get to hear my perspective
Yeah. So
and some facts on the Bible. She'll get that.
I don't think I want children, and I don't think anybody's crazy enough to have them with me. Matter of fact, speaking of mental illness, the last couple candidates that actually wanted to have children with me do in fact seem to have mental illness.
Oh,
But no, it's just but yeah, I don't think I could. I don't think it would work out with me in a believer. I have my reasons for thinking that, but I used to think that like, oh, I'd be so afraid of them indoctrinating the kids, and I would be. My thing is I would prefer to have children if I did, and hold that. Let them figure that out whenever life throws it at them. I don't know if they want them
hmm,
getting in a home, but yeah, I eventually landed on your approach, which was, oh, if you talk to my kids about Jesus, that's cool. But you've just opened the door for us to have that conversation.
that's right.
And I think when people realize that, they probably leave it alone preemptively, just because they don't even want to get me going. So I'll be like, go
Hmm.
ahead, okay. Oh, you want to talk about? Oh, okay, yeah, we gonna have that talk. We
Well,
gonna have that
look,
talk.
look. I can open up a Bible to pages 1 through 3. Right, we're talking the complete Bible, not that little green New Testament that gets passed out. Let's look at pages 1, 2, 3. And all I have to do is just keep asking my child, does it really is do we really have a firmament? No, there's no firmament. Okay, and just are people really created out of the sand on the ground, the dust on the ground? No, people have to, she'll get it. And again, created from the dust in the of the ground sure sounds like an allegory for taking a people that were desert dwelling people
Mm,
and moving them to like a population center
mm,
where they're introduced to other forms of culture for that time, modern things, innovation, different styles of dress, other religious beliefs. That's probably what that means. It probably doesn't mean that God took some dust and made a man. It
yeah.
likely doesn't mean that at all.
All right, y'all. Well, let's use this as a good segue to jump into our topic today. Thanks. Good to see Andrew and of course PC in the chat.
Welcome, everyone.
But thanks to everybody else that's watching, and we'll watch later. So today we're talking about, is religion a mental illness? I'm interested to see. I'm interested to see what the person said. He laughed because he know I think the answer is yes.
Yeah, you think for sure it is. You think for sure.
I'll state what I'm thinking right now up front, and then we'll see how it goes as it gets into the video. But I think it was funny. Me and Lena looked this up. Well, I don't know. We were like talking to ChatGPT about it or something, and it never could come out and say that there's nothing pathological about religious belief or religious practice. It couldn't, like, if I put in, is playing baseball a sign of mental illness? It's going to say no. It's going to be like, no, because there's, nothing indicative of playing baseball or whatever. It's going to be able to say no. It could not say no. It could say, well, it's not recognized. Well, it's a collective delusion, and we tend to think of mental illness as an individual phenomena. We have to think about what the social and political consequences would be of labeling a mental illness, right? It could do everything but tell me that it wasn't pathological. So I think the fact that we have to ask this question, or that we're even having this conversation, kind of tells you there's definitely something there, because again, we're not having the conversation of, is baking cupcakes a mental illness? Is playing the flute a mental illness? Why, if we have to ask, is religion a mental illness? Probably something going on there that's not indicative of health and well-being. Okay. The other thing is, The other thing is, yes, I do think sometimes we tend to focus on the beliefs themselves, and we stop asking questions about who are the believers. And just to be transparent, in the middle of my own personal journey, dealing with what I'm pretty convinced, the psychiatrist helped convince me, was potentially narcissistic people in my life. And now dealing with that, getting a sort of a crash course in narcissism and how it impacts people, you begin to realize that it's not certain things about the personality itself become indicative of the fact that there's something wrong. And I think with religion, we tend to focus on what people believe. Is that true or not? Can we say somebody is mentally ill based on what they claim to believe? And I want people to be clear, that's not what I'm saying. Like, I think that the bigger issue is certain types of people believe these things, and when we think about what it says about those people, that's kind of where we're looking. The other thing is, I think it's very clear that religion has sort of been a cudgel for mental health. Like, instead of, like, people do spirituality, quote unquote, when they need to be doing mental health. And so in that sense, I think churches tend to, I hate to say, but breed a culture where there's a lot of issues, but people are not really seeking help and treatment because they're spiritualizing it. The other thing I'll say is, we'll see where the person goes, but in some sense, I think we get caught up in the, well, is it diagnosable? Is it in the DSM-4? I think mental health is a much broader conversation than that. I think just because something isn't diagnosable, or more specifically, just because we don't diagnose something, whether it's diagnosable or not, does not necessarily mean that you're in, a healthy space, or that this is healthy behavior. So yeah, we'll see what they say. Did you have anything you want to throw in for preamble?
Oh yes. They now have a DSM-5, so that's Diagnostic and Statistical Manual.
Right,
So
right.
it's for like mental health professionals. DSM-5 definition of mental disorder. A mental disorder is a syndrome characterized by clinically significant disturbance in an individual's cognition, emotion regulation, or behavior that reflects a dysfunction in the psychological, biological, or development process underlying mental functioning.
Mm, mm. That's a very good definition, and I think we see all of that. Hit me with that last part again.
Sure. Let's see. It reflects a dysfunction in the psychological, biological, or development process underlying mental functioning.
Yeah, that's a lot of what I actually feel like is happening. Think about I think a lot of that's how I feel about religion is a lot of times it is repressed behavior, right? Taking things that are naturally just who you grow and mature to be as a biological being. First off, religion even denies your biological being. It doesn't even allow you to be honest about the fact that you are an animal, that you are a primate, that you are a glorified monkey, literally. And then the things we see when we see monkeys in the jungle doing monkey business, that's what we say it is. Oh, it's nature. It's just there's just natural. They're monkeys. Yeah, they're gonna have a little sex play. They're gonna throw stuff at each other, right? But when religion, all of a sudden, it takes your urges, it takes your natural desires, it takes your maturation. It pathologizes all of that. It demonizes all that. Yeah, you don't develop properly. So I absolutely see it disrupting your biological function. I absolutely see it disrupting your development and you become a grown ass person that is obsessed with the fantasy. That's another big thing for me. When you start looking at narcissism and some of these, and the other thing is, I think people say mood disorders, and now, and sorry, listen to me telling on myself. People say mental illness, mental health, and I think a lot of times we go straight to
Laka, am I still there?
yeah. You're still here, but can you hear us? Oh, I'll take that as a no. He probably popped back out, and I'm gonna give him a minute to pop back in. Yeah, there we go. And so before we jump back into it, just want to quickly shout out AR coming through the chat. Always good to have the boy AR in here, and Sumami is here. Appreciate you. I don't anticipate that this is a space where you will see Sumami or Pragmatic Crystal being hidden in the chat. If you know, you know. If you know, you know. I'm gonna just leave it at that. So
no holding back today, folks. I just want to bring up a few things. Obviously,
sure.
Part of our audience, though they may not watch the chat or be here for the live. There's some Christians in our audience. For them, I would say there's a few things to note in the Bible. I think, it's King Hezekiah. He went crazy for a little while, or was mentally ill for a little while. And you have people who, like Jesus heals someone with apparently epilepsy. And one of the Bibles I had actually says Jesus heals the epileptic, which is a straight up denial that a demon possessed the boy. And some people will believe that a demon, which the book of Enoch describes as the disembodied spirit of a human and a half human and half Nephilim person. So, I'm sorry, half human, half demonic. Not demonic. Is it Nephilim? Yeah, disembodied Nephilim spirit. So, um, it gets sadly it can get kind of ridiculous how the Bible addresses mental illness. But that was the time. Again, I defend those ancient people at times for some of their thoughts, their behaviors, or perspectives, as saying they were doing the best they can. I think to some degree they hadn't developed any sort of, or maybe in the Hebrew culture, an extensive program for dealing with people who had mental illness but instead they often probably saw them as someone who was possessed by demons. We see this in, I believe it's the Gospel of John, where Jesus, someone said, like, we think you have a demon. You know, that's where they ask him, is he a Sumerian as well? And they think he has a demon. So some would say, well, he has control of a demon, or he has a demon, like a demon possesses him. Jesus asks I think it's the Gadarene or Gerasene demoniac, about him, and there's legion, right? There's thousands of demons inside of this one person. You know, I mean, come on.
Yeah.
Come on, no way. It's just not the case. It's a story.
Yeah. So, you know, Maya's got the discussion going in the chat because Maya said, no, it's not a mental illness. You can't take a pill to get yourself out of religion. You can't read enough facts to get out of a mental illness. So I see where you're going with that, Maya, but I'm kind of taking a different approach here. So, like, one, people are going to disagree with what I have to say, and I'm not here to convince everybody I'm right. So, you know, it's all good. But also, like, you know, there's no pill to cure my bipolar. There are pills to help me manage it and treat some of the symptoms. But there are other mental illnesses which we currently do not have medication for or effective treatments. And so I don't think necessarily being able to treat something in a certain, just because we can't treat something the way we treat other illnesses doesn't mean it's not a sign of, you know, something that's a problem. The other thing is, and I tried to say this, and maybe we said this just before you stepped in, but I think trying to not do apologetics and not do the word games, like I was talking about how me and Lena had looked it up and we were having a good fun back and forth with ChatGPT about this. There's a lot of things to where if you ask, is this a mental illness? Is producing music a mental illness? Is playing drums a mental illness? You know, there's no reason to even have those conversations. I think the fact that you keep having to have this conversation about religion does indicate that there's something more significant there. And when you look into it, it's very clear that you keep getting social reasons, you keep getting political reasons, like the motivations to not pathologize religious belief, when you look into it, don't really actually seem to be coming to the defense of religious belief and saying it's a no, I don't even know why you think that. Instead, it seems to be, oh, we're too concerned about what the consequences of diagnosing it would be. What would it say politically? What would it say socially? Would it be a slippery slope towards discrimination? Like, it's all these other things, but, you know, there is a recognition in some regard that it's a collective delusion and things like that. So yeah, that's kind of my take. And then also I'm thinking about dealing with it. And I talked a little bit about this too, but it's like, so let's say you have somebody in your life, like my situation. I had a psychiatrist tell me, I think you're dealing with narcissistic personality disorder, describing issues going on in my relationship. Your psychiatrist is like, yeah, this is what I think you're dealing with. Got to think about that now. You get a crash course and you decide, I got to get up out of here. Now, for most people, do I know that this person has narcissistic personality disorder? No, I don't. Will I ever know if this person has narcissistic personality disorder or not? Probably not. Will I ever get them in front of a doctor for this? Probably not. Will they ever go in front of a doctor at any point in their life for this? Probably not. And so where's the line between diagnosable personality disorder versus just narcissistic traits and tendencies versus just you're just dealing with an asshole? In a sense, you don't know. But I think the bar can't be, hey, we can't have the conversation about saying you're disordered until you are past the diagnosable point. Because again, there's a lot of reasons a person may never get diagnosed. There's a lot of reasons you may never know that information. There may be social, political, and other factors as to why something is or isn't even acknowledged as being a mental pathology. But for people, eventually you have to deal with the real. You have to deal with reality on reality's terms. So if somebody is obsessed with a fairy tale, that's an issue. If somebody is, believing their religion is the one true one and it manifests as a lack of empathy towards people in different faiths or people who lack faith, that's a problem. If you end up in a power differential and you're dynamic with these people because you can't ever tell them they're wrong, even though their beliefs are harming you or people in your life and stuff like that, again, there's an issue. So that's kind of where I'm hoping to take some of this, is the fact that, like, at the end of the day, it doesn't even matter if they're diagnosable or not. At the end of the day, it doesn't even matter if it gets recognized as a condition, because if the behavior is such that it's like dealing with somebody that has mental illness because they behave in all the same ways, then for us, that's the problem. But anyway, let's jump into the clip, because we've done a lot of preamble, and I'm glad people are here, but let's I'm sure they'll want to see the actual content. All right, so let's jump into this.
Hey everyone.
Maybe I'll be convinced the other way. Who knows?
There's a strange idea that has quietly existed in the background of modern thought. Something that many people have felt but never said out loud. The idea that religion might not just be outdated or misguided, but something much deeper. Something closer to a collective psychological malfunction. A socially accepted
just quick, Jared said you can also have a mental illness that makes it harder for you to escape religion. I think this is absolutely happening.
Yeah, that's definitely
in a lot of cases. I think you can also have mental illness that draws you to religion and makes religion more attractive to you. And yeah, I think for a lot of people, just even the idea of spiritualizing mental health is a problem. So you have a lot of people in the church who need mental health treatment and won't seek it because instead they'll spiritualize it. They'll think they have a sin problem or a soul problem or, not being faithful enough.
You may.
Sorry.
I gotta say this. This is something Robert M. Price brought up a long time ago. A person could have a mental illness that draws other people to them, and that person could end up being a cult leader through their mental illness. So that got all the people who sincerely think they're Jesus Christ and go on and to develop a cult and all that stuff around it. That's happening now. That's happening now.
Yeah. So. And I think Robert M. Price himself is one of those people. Because that's the firestorm that started. For those that don't know, is Derek had us on last year, myself and Chrissy, I think Chrissy Hansen, and basically Derek decided not to make any more content with Bob Price because he's a bigot. But now Derek has decided, and Neil have decided to bring Bob back because they feel bad for him. He's still a bigot, but they feel bad for him, and most of us are not with it. But if you want to know more about that, tune in tomorrow, because I think Maya and I will be streaming to talk about that nonsense. All right, so yeah, but to your point, I think that's another thing inherent in religion. Like, yes, I'm sorry, I do think these beliefs, if you take them seriously and you practice according to the traditions and dictates of the faith, you will act like a mentally ill person. Like, I'm sorry. Like, it's even just the basics of the delusion, your sense of grandeur, your sense of being better than everybody else, your sense that there's a magical being in the sky watching your every move, controlling the universe, reading everybody's mind. Like I'm sorry. Like, I'm sorry. Y'all can say what y'all want. We could have this conversation. I'm here to listen. I'm here to learn. I promise. But there's just certain things I'm already very convinced of, mostly by way of actually having lived with these people, and like that's it's a huge part of it, is that the figures, the religious figures, are absolutely disordered personalities. They're absolute narcissists. They absolutely, and they show all the qualities. And yes, that part of what sucks about people like that is they use other people. And so people don't understand that, like, yes, pastors are absolutely the type of people that will lie to you and will absolutely keep this church grift going and absolutely feel no remorse about taking money from poor people who can't afford to be giving up 10% of their income. You have to accept the reality that there are people that actually think that's okay, that there are people that they're not wired like me and you. We would lose sleep at night. We would be crying. People, we'd be ashamed. You know, we'd be sitting around worried about getting canceled on YouTube, whatever it is, right? But I'm just saying, at least it shows something. There are people who literally they are laughing all the way to the bank. And so are there then like some other people in there, like some more quote unquote the sheep, the more innocent ones? To be honest, I think they're disordered in a different way, and that the way they're disordered makes them vulnerable to the narcissist leaders. And yes, part of it is their own narcissism, right? Like, but yeah, I think that's what's happening. Even myself, like when you look back and you start to realize there's a certain pattern of behavior that has manifested itself in your partners, and you're, you know, like me, you're damn near 40 years old, like there's some real history there. Yeah, absolutely. You can't just say all of them people were batshit crazy. You have to acknowledge there's something about you that's made you vulnerable to certain types of people, which means there's something about your personality that makes you, I hate to say this, a great mark, a great target for people with these other type of personalities. And if you want to really build a future for yourself where you're not going to continue to be victimized by a certain type of person, you got to get real about what makes you vulnerable to being their victim in the first place. And so, yeah, I think you absolutely have people with disordered personalities that have not developed properly, that have their own lack of empathy, have their own obsession with delusions of grandeur. Because I think that's what religion is. Like, come on, if you're a grown ass person and you think somehow there's something so special about you that you don't deserve to die, I don't. If that's not a delusion of grandeur, the word is meaningless to me.
They want to live forever. It's not that they don't want to die. There's a difference. They want to live forever with God in heaven.
But you can't. You can't sell that to a well-developed grown person. At least not without evidence. You gonna have to show me some people show me some people that haven't died, or show me at least some communication from these people. I mean, yeah, it's just really crazy. All right, come on, we're already getting sidetracked. Hey, Michael, good to see you. Good to see you. Answer the title, yes.
Like a virus.
Michael said yes.
It's not just about whether gods exist or not. That's already been debated endlessly. The real question is what kind of mental state it requires to believe in things without evidence, to build your identity on stories that crumble under scrutiny, and to live your life guided by fear, guilt, and invisible authority. These are the same traits we see in individuals who are considered mentally unwell. Yet when these patterns are wrapped in ritual, tradition, and community, they are not only tolerated, they're celebrated. One of the clearest markers of delusion is when someone...
Sumami, I pressed it wrong. I said Sumami and PC are not going to get hidden today, and then I accidentally deleted Sumami's message. Sumami, I just hit the wrong button. I wasn't trying to delete your message there. I brought it back. All right, I brought it back. I think there's a large amount of clergy and apologists that aren't even actual believers. They just know they can make a decent income off of it. Yeah, I think there's a lot of people with like sunk cost fallacies and things like that. Yeah, I think so. I think a lot of the apologists that I see online, and even some believers, yeah, I don't, there's no way they could be sincerely participating in the conversations that they've been participating in and not realize by now that it's all bullshit. So there's something deeply disturbing going on there. And gang, to be honest with you, that's why I'm at least for me, I feel like I'm shifting the messaging of my presence on YouTube. I think sitting around debunking religious beliefs is child's play, to be honest with you. Any of these beliefs can be debunked so easily that it's to me, it's no longer even worth the effort. It's fun to do once in a while for entertainment, or just to say, hey, we're a community of atheists. Let's rub shoulder to shoulder and hold hands or whatever, have some fun together. But in reality, I think now to move the needle forward, it's the resistance time. And to really motivate that resistance, I'm trying to show people you're dealing with broken people. You're dealing with broken people. And I'm telling y'all, when you start to realize what I'm on, it changes everything. It changes everything. Let me tell y'all something, a little something about me. I don't break up with girlfriends. Period. I cannot. Maybe that's a whole problem in and of itself. We can have that conversation. I'm not saying a girlfriend has never deserved to be shown the door, but I'm a ride or die type of partner. When I commit to something, I'm like, I'm in this. All right, we in this. Come on, let's go. Now, tell you else something about me, like on some real stuff, I'm not really confrontational like that. And I felt very strongly about this person, right? But what happens is when you learn about these things, you realize you can't fix it. It's like if my one black friend came to me and said, hey, Jason, there was a big terrorist attack downtown and the skyscrapers collapsed, and man, it would just save the city's economy if you could just rebuild the business tower in the center of the business district. I'll be like, I really appreciate the vote of confidence, but that is nowhere in my skill set, right? And so you realize you leave because you have to. You leave because it's not going to get better and you can't fix it. And when you recognize that, you're either going to sign up for a lifetime of misery or accept that you can't fix this and walk away. And I literally feel like that applies so much to our conversations with these people. Think about it, y'all. Some of us have been having conversations with some of these people for years. There's no such thing as a normal conversation or exchange of ideas that lasts for years. And one side, no matter what you throw at them, will never change their mind, never move, never be influenced. At some point, you have to recognize you're wasting your time because there's something wrong with that person. And when you start to realize, oh, they lack major developmental shit, like they lack the necessary empathy, they lack the required humility, they lack the ability to admit when they're wrong, they lack the ability to take accountability for how their behavior affects other people, they lack the ability to let go of a fantasy and delusional view of reality. You have to understand that obsession with a fantasy is part of it. So when you talk to a grown person that can't let go of their fantasy, like how many times are you going to sit down with a niece or nephew who's 35 and explain to them that the reason, they didn't do well in school was, they had learning issues, behavioral issues, didn't take good notes, whatever it was, and it's not their imaginary friend. You are not going to spend 5 years trying to convince somebody their imaginary friend is not the reason they failed in school. Why? Because eventually you're going to realize, okay, this person, for some reason, they just need this imaginary friend. I don't know what it is. I can't figure it out, but there's no amount of evidence. I done brought in psychologists. I done brought in experts. We done. But y'all, this is what we're doing. That's what we do. We've had the same conversation about the same imaginary friend for years, and most of us are just like, well, if I talk to this person and I use this tactics and I hit them with the logical philosophical jujitsu, then I introduce them to the evidence of evolution, then I tell them all the world histories of religion. Yo, they're gonna look at you and be like, oh, that's good and well, gotta go, time to go to church. Why? Because there's something wrong with them. And at some point, you have to realize that that thing that's wrong with them is not going to change. Maybe even cannot change. But yeah, y'all, that's why my whole tone has switched. That's why my whole message has switched up because it's no longer about debunking their beliefs. It's about helping people in the community understand there's something different, aka something pathological about these people. And when you realize that about people, you put them to the side because it's on them to deal with their issues, and then you do what you got to do because you're no longer waiting on them. All right, let's roll.
Believe so strongly that it shapes their entire reality, even if that belief has no basis in evidence. When a person claims to hear voices, talk to unseen entities, or believe the world will end because of supernatural prophecy, we normally classify that as a psychological condition. But when the same claims are made in a religious setting, they're treated as sacred. Why does the context make it acceptable? There are documented cases of people who have been diagnosed with schizophrenia or psychotic disorders because they believe they're chosen by a divine power. But if they reframe that same belief through the lens of religion, suddenly it's not seen as a symptom. It's seen as spirituality.
Now, this is something I actually struggled with in my mental health journey, okay? So let me tell y'all something. Like, I think I'm lucky. I think being an evolutionary biologist really helps in deconstructing because it's your job to understand the science. It's your job to, understand. And so it also puts you in a professional environment where, belief in these type of myths and stuff like that isn't really rewarded the same way it might be outside of academia. Okay. But also going through my own mental health struggles also helps because, like I say, when you start dealing with institutionalization, when you start dealing with, you got to really go see the psychiatrist, you got to really be in therapy, you have to really take 6 to 8 pills every day. Okay, you have to keep both feet firmly planted in reality. Is no time for play because if something a little off with you, you're not sleeping, you're not acting right, you having weird visions and stuff, like people calling them boys on you in a heartbeat. Please believe y'all, they are picking up that phone. Yeah, my neighbor upstairs. Yeah, I think he's having an episode. Yeah, I go send them. Yeah, come get him. Right, it's gonna happen quickly, y'all. And so you think that sucks. It does suck. Trust me, being institutionalized really does suck. But you realize it allows you to say, okay, I got to keep both feet firmly planted on the ground. I can't be having no delusions. So me and reality gonna have to get right. But absolutely, I have friends. I'm bipolar, but I have friends who were diagnosed as schizophrenic, kind of went through our mental health journeys kind of around the same time in college together and things like that. And yeah, that's one of the things that really struck out to me immediately about religion. Like, why was it that, my friend who thought, he would see people following him, or he thought people were following him, or he thought the government was spying on him, which, by the way, he was in IT and it turns out the government was spying on all of us. Like, so even things he wasn't necessarily wrong about, but, it was not felt he could substantiate at the time. Even if he could, it was still seen as delusions, and he was still diagnosed as schizophrenic, and it had major consequences, interrupting his ability to finish school, having to go home and live with his parents, then unhealthy dynamics there. Like it threw his life into chaos the same way my diagnosis threw my life into chaos. And so, but you realize then there's these other people, and they literally think God is with them everywhere, omnipresent, watching every single behavior they do, literally in their mind, reading their thoughts. Okay. And yeah,
watch out. Better not cry. Better not pout. I'm telling you why.
He sees you when you're sleeping. He knows when you're awake.
Come on, who's that song really about?
Santa. Yeah. And so you ask yourself, why is that okay? Why do these people get to be the same exact way? This other person, institutionalized, medication, can't finish school, like, really, like, you have to deal with this before we'll even just let you move forward with your life. But you could be religious and walking up and down the street talking about praise Jesus and hallelujah, and ain't nobody gonna say anything to you. So that's part of my
Actually,
perspective on this, is that it just feels unfair. Sorry, go ahead.
I'll disagree. And I think you and many of our audience members will disagree as well. If there's a person walking down the street and they're speaking in tongues, and they are just walking up to random people, and let's just say a parking lot. They're walking through a Walmart parking lot and they're speaking in tongues, and then they'll stop speaking in tongues and then quote a scripture or two or three perfectly. Let's say they miss no words, they nail it perfectly. And then they speak a little about the meaning of it, and then they go right back into speaking in the tongues. We can agree. Most people think that person is insane. Even the Christians, even the ones that know about speaking in tongues, because if they're faking the speaking in tongues portion, they would look at that person and think, wait a minute. What does that say about me? Again, perfect quotation of scripture, explanation, back to tongues, and so on and so on and so on.
Yeah, but see, that's
insane.
that is very interesting because no, I think you're right about that in the sense that religious people are quick to believe that other religious people who take it seriously and manifest the signs of taking it seriously are disordered or something wrong with it.
Mm-hmm.
And it's very deep, y'all. Like I could tell you, even just from growing up, I could tell you, for instance, Catholics even think evangelicals are on some bullshit just because evangelicals are all, we have a personal relationship and they're weeping in the church because they feel God's presence and they got the rock band and all that. Catholics are like, what's wrong with y'all? Like y'all are crazy with that, right? But then even the evangelicals think that, like, who are also evangelicals, they think like the Pentecostals are really messed up, right? Because they're the ones speaking in tongues, laying on of hands, thinking that they're doing prophecy and all this type of stuff. And so you see this very weird interaction where like the evangelical thinks the Pentecostals crazy, for doing speaking in tongues and all that. The Pentecostals looking at the evangelical like, what are you talking about? Like, you're in a mega church and y'all are in there crying and all of this type of stuff. And then a lot of y'all are like crazy, right? Where like people, they don't even understand them. And then again, they all looking at the Catholic like, well, you're using rosary beads and praying to Mary and all of these saints. Like, so yeah, it's like religious people see other religious people taking it too seriously and have a certain disdain for that. I'm gonna take it to one even deeper that most people don't realize. Even within hyper religious families, you will get looked down upon for taking religion too seriously. I know that sounds crazy. I know that sounds crazy, but
I need to hear your explanation of this, please.
All right, so it's like even in my family, right? Like, grandparents are hyper religious, mom is hyper religious. When I got to the point as an adult where I was like working at a church, sharing the gospel and all of this type of stuff, I could tell my family didn't like it. One, I think on a very practical level, it was seen as kind of a disappointment in the sense of, we want you to go out there and be successful, right? And what are you doing? Like working at a church? Like, where's this gonna go? Like this ain't really going nowhere. But yeah, also absolutely, there was a certain, because there's gonna be tension and distinctions and beliefs, and you go to a different type of church and all this type of stuff. But there's a way you could really tell that it was like, that was supposed to be their thing, that they were this super religious and they didn't want somebody with my beliefs or my lifestyle and different things like that to have my own super religiosity that can make because again, you realize now that I look back at it, totally makes sense, because again, these are narcissistic people. So it's about dominance, and they don't want you to outshine them on the thing that makes them special. And so that's what this is about. Like, yeah, grandma wants you to grow up to want to be like grandma, but she doesn't want you to grow up to have your own religiousness where now you think you're more of Christian than she is, or you got your own ideas about what it means to be a Christian or what it doesn't mean to be a Christian. No, those same people are going to shut that down, right? If your grandma was on that conservative, evangelical stuff, she has traditional family values and traditional ideas about LGBTQ people and all this type of stuff. Now you grow up to be maybe like a more progressive liberal type Christian, but you're super religious. Nah, they ain't feeling all of that. So I don't know, maybe some of y'all have experiences, but I really think that that's true. I really think that there's a false self that celebrates it. There's like the mask, maybe they'll get into the mask, but it's like their mask persona has to celebrate everybody's religiosity, but there's very much inward like hierarchy and pecking order, and they don't want you being so religious that you threaten their place in the family's religious pecking order. So I think that's interesting even within families.
Interesting point. But yeah, there are those people. I think there's a sort of the notion of shame when some people look at people who are more religious, and I'm wondering if that isn't them realizing I haven't fully committed to this. That person is more committed than I am, and that's embarrassing for them, right? Or it shames them in some way, great or small.
Yes, absolutely. And matter of fact, like that's a huge part of disordered personalities is shame, especially people with disorder in that way. Like, and again, think about the religion. How much of the religious culture is centered around shame? These are the conversations we are not having because we're not talking about religious people and what makes them different. And once you realize how central all this is to the culture, yes, absolutely, it's disordered. But yeah, I think I think you're right about the role that shame plays in it. I think it's on two fronts. I think it absolutely one calls their bluff in a sense. Like you said, that they're not as serious as this other person. But also I think and there's a sense of shame there because there's a sense of like, we know you're not really, you're not, we know you're not stopping your work day 5 times to face Mecca and pray, but this other person is.
Yeah, so, those Muslims over there, they're very serious about that.
Yeah. So
you got to respect that.
But another part of it is it pulls the curtain off of the benign version of the faith. See, I think faith is malignant, and I think a lot of people know that. And what they try to do is a lot of reputation washing for their faith by pretending in their own mind that they're like a more reasonable person. It's not a religion, it's a relationship. Oh, I'm Jesus loves everybody. The PR believer. Right. And
the PR believer.
That's what we're calling the PR believer. But what happens is when the other person goes crazy, and usually what comes with it is a lot of problematic behavior, right? Like we rarely say a person is too religious and they're too progressive or something, right? It's normally they're too strictly adhering to the dogma and the actual like tenets of the indoctrination. And so that pulls it back for the other person. So like to give a particular example, you have a lot of people who want to say, oh, I'm religious, but I'm pro LGBTQ. Really is no such thing because all of these religions are inherently anti-LGBTQ. And the hyper-religious person proves that, right? Because a hyper-religious person is like, no. It says right here. It says it right here. You can't do that, right? And then on top of that, they're gonna they're gonna act that out. They're gonna and then they're gonna associate that with with religious activity, right? So it's not even just that this person is coming out as a bigot, right? They're saying, no, I'm a bigot and I'm in church more than you do. I read my Bible more than you do. I pray more than you do, right? I'm showing you up in terms of the religiosity. And so it kind of reveals that, hey, if you actually took your faith seriously, if you actually believed what was in the book, if you actually stepped your game up and really committed to this religion, you'd be an asshole too. And so I think that's part of their discomfort as well. Go ahead.
I thought of, listening to your response, a person can be a bigot, but in their own way. They're selective about the bigotry. Um, so one person, again, we'll stay within the realm of the Bible, is saying that, okay, homosexuality is wrong, but the same punishment is due your disobedient child. But you didn't kill your disobedient child, did you? Right? That wasn't called
Right.
for. You didn't stop loving your disobedient child, did you? Because you didn't stone them, so that means that you didn't have the village stone them. So that means you probably loved them. So why persecute the homosexual? Why? Whether you know them or not. Why? You knew somebody who committed adultery. You didn't kill him, right? Per the Bible, you didn't do that. So why would you persecute somebody who's homosexual? The Bible also goes on to say, hey, somebody works on the Sabbath, you have to kill him. But you didn't do that. In fact, you started a business and you have people working on Saturday, or the Sabbath is moved to Sunday for many. Okay, there's people working at your business on a Sunday, but you don't punish them for that. You pay them for that. So why over here persecute these people whose behavior you don't care for? You are not adhering to your own book, which says that all of those people get some sort of severe permanent punishment. Why? Why is it so easy for people? And you're not going to fully sway me, Pocket Locker, but here I am without a defense for the believer who wants to be a bigot. I'm utterly without a defense for them. I have nothing but criticism for that sort of thing because it doesn't make sense to me, other than just simply get them to admit maybe you're a hypocrite. Maybe they are hypocritical, and it's out of freedom, right? They want to be able to make certain choices. It could be out of love. They want to love someone and have them continue in life rather than, punishing their 9-year-old with the rest of the village by stoning them to death. That's not what is best. But why on earth would they ever look at someone else's lifestyle and think their opinion of what that person should be doing means more than how that person is trying to build meaning in their life, how that person is trying to have joy and personal acceptance in their life?
No, I'm with you. I'm just I'm trying to figure out. I can't see like comments from Sumami. I think I accidentally hit her. Now I have to undo. I can't believe I literally said you won't see Sumami getting banned here, and then I literally hit the wrong button. This is so terrible.
It
All right.
happens. It happens.
So yeah, it's tough. So you brought up a good point. Maybe they're a hypocrite.
Mhm.
Yes, yes, that's it though. But there there's a level at which they're aware that they're a hypocrite. There's another level at which it doesn't matter. All right, so part of dealing with certain personality disorders, let's take narcissism. Part of it is that a person lacks empathy. That's part of the condition. Part of it is a person is obsessed with a grandiose image of themselves and fantasies of unlimited power, success, or beauty. That's part of the condition. So now you're going to ask yourself the question, why don't you support this person and work with this person so they can just get some help? Well, because that's part of the condition. Part of the condition is they're not wrong. So they can't need help. If they needed help, they would literally suffer injury. For a narcissist, the treatment is worse than the disease. Never forget that. So because part of the disease is they don't take responsibility for their behavior and how it impacts others, they are very unlikely to seek help. They only really seek help when it's co-occurring with other things. If like their life is blowing up such to the point that they're really afraid their partner's going to divorce them, they're going to lose their job, whatever like that, they might seek out help and support for that. And then even then it typically doesn't work. It's not lasting. And even sometimes the psychiatrist treating them themselves will not tell that person that they're suffering from narcissistic personality disorder. Why? Because it won't help. They'll just deny it, and it'll make them even more resistant to treatment. This is why you can't fix it. That's why they call it a personality disorder. Because literally the person's fundamental character is disordered, usually based on childhood trauma. Why am I saying all of this? Because at some point these people are always going to be hypocritical. That's part of why if they were unwilling to be hypocritical, they wouldn't be believers as grown people. They wouldn't. The fact that they can in their mind say, yeah, my God loves everybody, but these people are sinners and these people worship the wrong God. And actually only if you believe in my savior, my way, can you go to heaven. But I do. So I'm good. I'm never going to die. Oh, I'm going to live in heaven for eternity. Everybody else, whoops, they're kind of that. The rest of us have to realize you lack empathy for those people. You just do. And so at some point you have to realize that is, yes, they're hypocrites, but they're not going to stop being hypocritical anytime soon, because the hypocrisy is part of it. And it's now become a fundamental part of it's replaced entire chunks and modules of their personality. And so it at some point it's like it's up to the rest of us to say, okay, I'm just not going to do this anymore. Like I'm just not, because that hypocrisy is always going to be there. Now, one thing that's interesting is I think if you're going to do it, you got to go there. Like when they say that to you, you got to stop the whole show and say, let's talk about that. You know, it's because it seems you're evaluating the claims you believe with a much different standard than you're evaluating the claims of others. What is that? And then ask them straight up, like, what does that say about you? Because and it's kind of interesting. I don't know, maybe I'm talking myself into it right now because I'm just working through this. But I also think it allows you to talk to them then about their favorite topic, which is them, right? These are fundamentally self-centered people who at the end of the day just want to talk about themselves. So then let's do it. Like, let's talk about you. Like, all right, what else you got before we hit this tape?
No, just move on.
Okay. Great discussion, man.
That shift should make us pause, because it means we're not evaluating beliefs based on truth or evidence. We're evaluating them based on social approval.
There you go.
Religion normalizes magical thinking. It trains the mind to abandon reason in favor of faith. And that's where the parallel to mental illness becomes hard to ignore. In most areas of life, believing without evidence is seen as a flaw. If someone believes their neighbor is a demon and refuses to interact with them, we'd call that a serious psychological problem. But if someone believes non-believers are going to burn forever and still teaches this to children, it's called moral education. That brings up another critical point. Indoctrination. Children are especially vulnerable. When a young brain is still developing, being told that unseen forces are watching, judging, and punishing their thoughts can lead to lifelong anxiety. Many adults who grew up religious report chronic guilt, fear of abandonment, and obsessive thoughts, even after leaving the faith. These aren't just philosophical scars. These are psychological injuries. In fact, there's a growing field of study called religious trauma syndrome. It shares characteristics with PTSD. People suffer from nightmares, panic attacks, and emotional numbness because of what they were taught to believe. These effects don't come from just
I don't know if I have this. I don't know that I have those symptoms. It'd be interesting to learn more about that. But I definitely imagine there might be people in our community who do, and just keep going. You know, just stay here. And by that I mean like on the planet. Just stay here because you're dope, and there's definitely communities of people recovering from religion that can support you, and we try to be one of those communities. But I absolutely suffer from religious trauma, and if y'all can't tell, my life is kind of dominated by religious trauma. And it's a crazy thing. It's a crazy thing. Like, I always knew my family was weird, for instance, but like literally, you know, I'm literally now just at 38, almost 39, and starting to recognize the influence of personalities, or recognize like disordered personality types and stuff like that, and then go back in my past and see it, right? So to realize all the religious-based narcissism that was going on in my family, like I'm just now giving voice to that because I'm just now figuring it out. And so, yeah, religious trauma, I think, though, is something a lot of us definitely know and are experiencing. And something else I was thinking about, too, is they've essentially also poisoned our ability to resist. Part of what I've noticed is, let's face it, these religious types have a certain degree of prestige and dominance in our society. Matter of fact, I would argue people wouldn't be so quick to associate with these religions if it wasn't for the privilege and status that comes with it. And essentially, they've basically taught us to fight on their terms. So even for people who are the victims of religious trauma or trying to walk away from these cults, I feel like a lot of times, again, they have taught us to feel like everything is a sin, so we doubt ourselves. They have taught us that we're supposed to love our enemies, which I actually think is sick and also a sign of a disordered personality. So you don't know how to actually say, no, I'm angry about my enemies, and if my enemy don't stop, my enemy's about to experience some serious consequences for crossing the line. Right? People feel like, you feel like, I have felt like we are not worth fighting for. No. I'm worth taking all that love, your enemy's nonsense, putting it in the wastebasket of history where it belongs, and reminding you, if you disrespect and cross Dr. Bundy again, it won't be time out. It will be time's up, as Uncle Bobby said, right? That was the moment I had to come to with my ex. Like, sorry, nope, I'm done. Like, nope, like literally time is up. Literally time is up. And like, it's tough to do that, but part of the reason it's so hard for me to do that is because I was indoctrinated with religion when the crucial years of my life, when I should have been learning emotional regulation, how to set boundaries, how to have healthy relationships, what healthy relationships even look like. Some of y'all know I was the only black kid in an all-white school. Okay, cool. I don't know, fight the power. I don't know, like, what do you do with that information, right? But part of what I'm learning about that information is that is absolutely part of the reason where all of a sudden, if I had a romantic connection with somebody, a lot of times it was threatened because the dad was threatening me or the older brother was threatening me. And then it literally created situations where my girlfriends had to act like they were not my girlfriends. I had to watch my girlfriends bring other decoy guys that I knew to dances so that their family wouldn't get suspicious that they were with me. Then at the same time, other females that I should have dated and been in relationships with, because I was very close, healthy friendship, healthy relationship dynamic with their family, I would not pursue those girls. Why? Because now that I'm looking back, I understood what it was. And I kind of knew then, and I would tell them, like, dating me is going to turn your life upside down. Right? Like, you don't want the trauma. Like, you don't want that, right? Dating me comes with all this other attention and all this other, you know what I mean? And when you really like cool with somebody, like, look, let me tell you, it's not fun. You know? So when you look, so now when I look back at all that, where am I going with this? Y'all? You realize that is programming you that you're not deserving of love. I would tell people, you could talk about hooking up under the bleachers, fooling around, driving out to Lover's Lane, doing whatever you want to do. My fantasy my entire time in high school was to be dating someone and have their family invite me over for dinner. And I can tell you it never happened. And that's what I'm talking about. Any of those girls that I was close enough to their family that they did invite me over to dinner, me and the girl, I'd be like, I'm not even going to date her because I got such a good thing here. I don't want to fuck that up. So, and then none of the women I was actually dating could ever just have me over for dinner. So then you realize as a grown person, this is part of where you learned you were not lovable. This is part of where you learned that no matter what you did, no matter how good of a guy you were, no matter how smart you were, no matter how talented of a musician you were, no matter how many people just liked you, you for some reason were not deserving of love. And now you have to deal with the fact that you're a grown man who has never learned to cope with that and build healthy relationships and boundaries and all of that shit. So my point is that all of that type of stuff that we go through when we're developing matters. Go ahead.
I think you could reframe that. And
Sure,
maybe it's not that no one will love you or that you are not lovable. It's that because your friends did love you. I don't know that middle schoolers and high schoolers go around saying they love each other very much. I don't know that that's a thing, right? I know of probably two people that were able to say that sort of thing in high school to someone that they weren't dating, right? It may be that the environment you are in, those schools, aren't necessarily conducive to people being free enough to say that.
Oh, that's true. You get in trouble for PDA.
well, it's think of those girls that you dated that may have wanted to bring you home to meet their parents because they have your approval. They want their approval. What does that mean? That means that they are loved and accepted by you, and they are loved and accepted by their parents. And now the decision to date you is respected by your parents. And maybe if the parents were to enjoy you and appreciate you, that further is gratifying to that young woman. Like, hey, looks like I made a good decision. Mom likes him, dad likes him, the dog likes him, and I love him. That's victory. If you were in a situation, one after another, where that wasn't going to happen because the woman didn't have that sort of security about her family, that's completely separate from her feelings. She probably wouldn't have been there had you not been who you are and treated them the way that you treated them. Those women wouldn't have been, young women, they wouldn't have been there because they might not have been looking for someone who was abusive. There are those people that sadly do look for someone who's abusive, but that wasn't who you are. So if you don't, I have a swimming pool. If I never get in it, right, it's still there. If it were filled with hot lava, I probably should stay out of there because it's not conducive to cooling off. Right? You got to think of that. Where did Pocket Locker just go? Where did you go?
You don't see me? I'm at the bottom.
Oh, I can't. My screen's cut off. I can't see.
Oh, okay. So that's
It's like
better. That's
it's
better for
static.
you.
Oh,
Okay.
I don't care. I don't care. I'd
Okay.
rather see how you're reacting than see me
Okay.
standing there
Yeah.
talking,
Yeah. Okay.
trying
Okay.
to figure out where to
No,
look.
I understand.
Yeah, and I'm not very entertaining when it comes to that sort of thing.
Yeah. Yeah.
But I think you get my message. People have to be in a space, and if I am to defend religion here, I would say to some people, religion creates that space for them, and that's why it's so prolific. That's why it goes on and on and on and on because people do have that space where if you're poor, you could go to the rich church and
Mm,
they might talk about you behind your back, but they're gonna probably be pretty glad to see that you're doing well enough to still come to church. You know, that might for them that might be rather satisfying to see you doing that. And one day God's going to bless you when they might have all the money in the necessary to set you up how you need to be set up to flourish. They still may not do it, but they're one day God's going to bless you. No, you could do it right now. No, God's going to bless you. I've been sent a word of faith from on high that God wants me to give you tens of thousands of dollars or purchase a home for you or a car that's worth more than $700. That was God didn't tell me any of that stuff. So
yeah. But it's also it's incredibly poison pilled, right? Like there's always it's a bait and switch, right? We talked about that last week, but where there's sort of the love bombing up front. So you realize that too, right? Like narcissists love bomb people. So think about religious people who, especially in Christianity, where they love everybody. It's actually not healthy to love everybody. You should not love people you don't know. Again, maybe the stranger you're walking to up on the street is a very dangerous, really, really bad person. Like
mhm.
so it's a bit weird, right? But that's the start. And then there's the devaluation where nope, actually you're a sinner, and nope, actually it turns out we don't love you the way you are. We actually
Mhm.
need you to live how we want you to live and believe what we want you to believe. So there's something very nasty about all that. And then of course, if you decide that you don't believe what we believe, or that eventually they will just discard you, which is a thing a lot of us have probably dealt with, where once people realize that they couldn't bring us back to the flock, and the latest that they had heard from Sean McDowell wasn't going to shred our atheism the way he said it would. Sometimes they lose interest. I want to talk about what Rochester Swift is saying, which is talking about some difficulty with the ex in controlling the child. The son, unfortunately, said, but I've seen so much cowardice and mendacity from Christians in the last 45 years. I'm just calling atheists who make excuses for them Vichy atheists. I don't know what is the Vichy mean. I don't know what
Okay,
that means.
no, I can't define Vichy well, but I do know what Rochester means. So they were like the Vichy French, which I think they were sympathizers with the Nazis. I think she's saying I'm a sympathizer.
Uh,
I'm a sympathizer with Christians. I,
Not sure what
I
Rochester's pronouns are.
so I love many, many, many Christians, and I can't look any of them in the eye and say what you believe. Your belief is really a mental illness. I don't see them
Oh,
exercising their
because it's the
beliefs in that
cowardly
way.
Christians who allow the nastiest stuff to go down every time.
Well, there are, and
Mm,
thanks for that clarification. I don't know who
mm.
the clarification is from, just so you know. I can't see that
Oh,
unless you.
that's Rochester. Rochester
Okay,
still. Yeah,
well,
yeah,
thank you,
yeah.
Rochester. I appreciate that. There, it's funny, a religion that tells you to be bold, as Christianity does. There is a lot of unwillingness for them to do that to each other, right? Which I would see as a gift. The Bible goes on to say you're supposed to gently rebuke people. Your brothers and sisters in Christ. Give a gentle rebuke. And so often that isn't done, or it's done in a YouTube video, but not to the people at fault. right? This sort of YouTube is broadcasting when you might want to narrowcast. I've recently had to referee between my Christian cousin who started he has multiple businesses. He's doing extremely well. And my aunt asked him to send my aunt who's not doing extremely well physically or financially said, "Hey, send me like a DoorDash meal." And he was offended and he insulted her, which led to her to be insulting to him. And I reached out to him saying, "You're both wrong. You need to apologize to each other, and you should definitely send her 2 meals instead of just one." So he apologized. He didn't send her a meal though. So now I got to go full Jesus and pull a scripture on him and say, "Here's why I say you should send her 2 meals and not just one." Because Jesus says that's how you should react if you're going to be a Christian. That's exactly what you should do. And you didn't do that. So what are you telling me you are if you don't want to do what boss Jesus said? Just say it. I love having this much money and I don't want to give it away to my aunt who doesn't have it. It's easier to me. It's easier to say that. I don't want to pay the painter what I'm paying him. But when I look at how long it'll take me to do what I'm paying him to do, it's like a day's difference. And I assign a value to that day because the people I work for assign a value to my time that I agreed to. Well, I get more of my time back to do something else I'd rather do, spend it with my family, tinker on my truck, whatever. I get that time back. So maybe it's worth it to me to pay him. The landscapers, same thing. I took a day to do what they can do, the three of them can do in less than an hour. Maybe it's worth it to give them the money because now I'm not taking multiple days to do the thing they can do extremely quickly with their knowledge, their experience, their equipment. I can't compete, so I got to pay up. I think that's what I guess a lot of people, maybe that's why religion is such a refuge, because in some ways, pocket locker, people feel they can't deal with society the way it is. So for many, religion might be escapism. It's their way out without leaving. It's creating a force field around their lives that, I'm going to say what words really came to my mind, a pretend bubble around their lives to shield out what they can't take, right? My aunt, I'm going to get one of my other aunts, I'm going to give it up to God. I'm going to give it up to God. I'm going to give it up to God. I'm like, but you're capable of resolving this. Why would you give it up to God? Well, the answer just might be because it's really hard to deal with. And I need to understand that.
Yeah, but I also think part of it is that there's something wrong with them. I mean that it not I don't want to, and I don't want to say it's a weird term. I don't want to say there's something wrong with them in the sense that I think religious belief is very normal. Like it's a normal human thing to do. And maybe even as a person with a diagnosed condition, I'm like, look, why it's not that big of a deal. Like that, and it's part of narcissism. Like people think they're too good to have conditions. I having a little bit of pathology to your brain functioning is something that describes a lot of people. But yeah, I do think for a lot of these people, there's an obsession with the fantastical that is a bit unsettling. All right, so Christopher says, religion is taught it's sort of possible to indoctrinate a mental disorder on someone. I guess it's less like bipolar and more like addiction. I don't know. Maybe religion reacts with mental illness. So I think there's definitely truth to it reacting with mental illness. But yeah, I think when you really look into these things, it's like A lot of it is environmental. There are brain differences a lot of times that can be patterns that people can identify, different development of different region of the brains. And it depends on what condition you're looking at, whether we even have information as to how much of that is genetic versus environmental. Obviously, the reality is all traits are both, but sometimes a shifting balance of how much nature, how much nurture. But that's another thing that I think we have to come to grips with a little bit better as a society, which is that, yes, a lot of times illness of all kinds is produced by the environment, right? A lot of times what makes you sick is what you ate. A lot of times why you got a cold is where you live and how you were dressed that day. And the same thing does apply to mental health, and a lot of conditions or disorders are produced by environmental factors. A lot of times, just like something as straightforward as trauma in the youth. A lot of personality disorders are believed to be a defense mechanism that a person adapted as a child to trauma they were experiencing as a child. But it became, rather than a thing they did once or twice, it became a deeply ingrained pattern in their way to cope. And then they literally never grew out of it. And now you're dealing with a grown person who storms out of a room every time somebody disagrees with them, because that's how 6-year-old them stayed safe. So yeah, I think we need to account for that and to recognize that religion can play a huge factor in that, because most people are indoctrinated to it as children, which means they're in it heavy when their brain is, our brains are always developing, but especially when you're a child. And a lot of times it puts stuff in people. Again, talk about being unlovable, telling people you're broken, you're a sinner, you deserve death, you deserve torment. To be honest with you, y'all, I think as a society, we need to stop being so tolerant of religion. And I don't mean that to say we need to be less tolerant of religious people. It's exactly the opposite. It's like, no, protect people's rights as individuals, but then to convince them they're wrong. I'm serious. I don't want people to leave Christianity because there were laws mandating that you can't go to church. I want people to leave Christianity because they realize it isn't true and they stopped going to church. You know what I mean? Like that's the thing. But I do think it has to get to a point where those of us that can see the problems can speak to the problems, because eventually what you realize when you're dealing with disordered personalities, and I do think that's a huge part of this problem. A part of this problem, even with what we're looking at now, is we throw mental illness like a jumbo. I started to say it earlier, but I kind of lost my train of thought. A lot of times when we think about mental illness, we immediately go to like crazy, insane. So we're thinking about things that are a lot of times like schizoaffective. A person has delusions, a person has visions, right? Like that type of thing. But then there's a whole spectrum of like mood type disorders. And I think they can sometimes play a role. There's anxiety suites. There's all sorts of, different spectrums, and then also suites of personality disorders. And so I think, for instance, like myself, having not really been that educated on personality disorders because I have a mood disorder and I have to spend most of my time dealing with mood disorders, I'm like cool with it. Like, and I tell people this is kind of an education for me. Think about most people are bipolar. I could even say in this community, myself, Nitty, Uncle Bobby, most people are bipolar, because they told you. which means that they're aware of it. They're probably aware that it can affect their relationships with other people. They're probably taking proactive steps to minimize the negative impacts it has on other people. Like they've gotten an education on it. They've gone to classes. They're in cognitive behavioral therapy, right? They're probably taking their medication and they're probably under psychiatric care. Now, it still may be a lot, right? But I'm realizing there's a lot of information in that, and it says a lot about the person, at least that person, and how they're dealing with their condition. You take something like a personality disorder, you're now talking about a different suite of conditions. Lack of awareness and lack of empathy and all of that is part of that disorder. It's very unlikely. I'm not saying there are people who have narcissistic personality disorder or borderline personality disorder, and they're aware of it and they can talk to you about it and they're in treatment or whatever, but it's much rarer because that's part of the condition. And so what I'm getting at is I think a lot of us don't really have enough understanding about mental health and the breadth of, you know, what's really out there and what really happens to even be able to evaluate that. Because when we think about, is this a mental illness, we're typically thinking about a very limited set of conditions. But for instance, when you start thinking about personality disorders, you realize how fundamental obsession with fantasies are, and the delusions of grandeur. Once you learn that, you now can't unsee that in religion, and you realize how much it's fundamental to religion. So it does open your eyes quite a bit. All right, let's go ahead and hit this.
Just bad experiences with individuals. They come from internalizing an entire system of thought that suppresses doubt, demands obedience, and punishes critical thinking. If a person was isolated, told their thoughts are sinful, told the world is corrupt, and that they need to conform to avoid punishment, we would see that as emotional abuse. But when it's called salvation, it becomes untouchable. That's the hidden danger. Religion wraps harmful ideas in comforting language: love, peace, hope. But beneath that surface is often a rigid set of beliefs that distort how people see themselves, others, and reality itself. One study from the Journal of Religion and Health found that individuals who score high in religious fundamentalism often have lower levels of analytical thinking. That doesn't mean religious people are unintelligent. But it does suggest that when people are trained to rely on faith over logic, their ability to question and analyze weakens over time. That kind of mental conditioning mirrors what happens in cults and closed systems, where doubt is discouraged and conformity is rewarded. Even the structure of many religions mirrors obsessive-compulsive behavior. Repeating prayers a set number of times. Avoiding certain foods.
You could take a few minutes to cool off there, Master. We don't mess with Ryan around here. That's not gonna get you far in this life.
Feeling unclean unless specific rituals are performed. There's an excessive focus on purity, control, and guilt. These patterns can overlap with symptoms seen in OCD, where repetitive thoughts and rituals are used to reduce anxiety. But instead of being treated, they're institutionalized. The concept of sin itself...
Yeah, okay, so that's very interesting. Like, yeah, like the obsession with rituals, it's weird, y'all. And I think a lot of times it doesn't seem to be so much. And if it doesn't seem to be so much, we're okay with it. Like, if you just need to go to church once on Sunday, people don't care. Okay, like you're gonna pray from time to time. But when you think about it, it does get to be a bit weird. Like, because again, it becomes a way of like sprinkling God dust all over life, right? When you get to the point, like my grandparents, when you pick up the phone, my grandparents don't say hello, they say praise the Lord. Like literally, praise the Lord. And you're supposed to respond like, "Oh, praise the Lord, Grandma." Like it's weird to begin every conversation on the phone with a command to worship your God. But then they pray before they pull out of the driveway, pray for traveling mercies, and thank God for traveling mercies when they when they get home. And then you're in church 3-4 nights a week, and you can't eat a meal without, thanking your God. So all of this becomes very weird. And then another thing I noticed is, I hate to say this, but for a lot of these people, I judge a lot of the problems about relationships, right? That's really where a lot of this comes down to me. And one of the things that's really indicative of having, you're in a relationship with somebody with issues is like confusion. Like a lot of times you're really just confused about their behavior because it doesn't make sense. And one of the things I've noticed is there's like neglect that comes with a lot of these relationships. And I've noticed this with my ex. I noticed this with like my mom. I've noticed this with like people in my relationship. And part of it is a lot of times these rituals are escape hatches. They're used as avoidance tactics. Like, it's like they put these things up and then they don't have to deal with real life. It's like if there's conflict in a certain person's life, oh nope, sorry, I'm out of here because I gotta go pray, or sorry, I'm out of here, I gotta go to church. And it's kind of hard, like I said, if it just seems like it's part of that person's routine, you don't really think that there's a problem there. But sometimes when you start to realize there's issues in the relationship, you realize that those rituals, that spirituality, in a sense, is used as part of this person's avoidance behavior in many cases. And yeah, that's definitely tough. Yeah. All right, I'll hit play.
Is psychological warfare. It creates the idea that you're inherently broken and need to constantly seek forgiveness.
Could you pause it, please?
Yes, sir.
The AI program that created this used the word warfare. When it comes to talking to religious believers, one of the hardest things for me to hear is that word. They're in spiritual warfare. For me, the term F you comes to mind because I'm like, you are not in spiritual warfare. There is no Satan. There are no demons. No one's trying to screw with you. You're not on spiritual candid camera. There's none of that's happening.
Spiritual candid camera.
If you're under 30, you're probably looking like, what is candid camera? Actually, if you're under 40, what is candid camera? Unless you have old parents.
Well, now everything's candid camera, right? Everything.
Exactly.
Yeah. It's about to be on the gram is what that means, y'all. Yeah.
So it kind of hurts me, honestly, to hear people say that, because my response, and I don't say this, is that those people have given up on the rational pursuit of a solution to their problems. When people say they are a spiritual warrior, that's real hard for me to hear too, because that's the same criticism as someone saying they're in spiritual warfare. I don't think they're trying.
Yeah, no, and also again, like going back to what they were saying about, just imagine that in any other context. I remember, the cartoons that we had coming up where like you had the good pixie, the little angel on your shoulder, and then you had the bad pixie, the little devil on your shoulder. Right? I had two imaginary friends growing up. Their names were Johnny and Gray, and they were very much manifestations of that. They were supposed to be me, ostensibly. We were supposed to be like triplets somehow, so they were like exactly like me, and Johnny was the good one, and Gray was always, well, Gray, trying to get me in trouble. and
Praise
eventually,
always well.
you know,
All we need to know, really.
but again, eventually you grow out of that, you know, and you realize you don't have imaginary friends. But if somebody, again, I could tell you from experience, like if somebody really thought there were these supernatural invisible beings at work influencing every thought or behavior of the world, we would normally institutionalize that person. So the question becomes, why institutionalize them in any other context? But you know, if the lore of your imaginary universe comes from, you know, established religious canon, then we don't touch that.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. It does feel, it does feel unfair. And then also, like, how can that not affect your behavior and how you treat other people? I think one of the things that a lot of us are reckoning with, I think, is we've put this myth in our head of this religious believer who their beliefs only apply to them. They only go to church, they go home, they read their Bible in their prayer closet, but the other 98% of their life is not influenced by those beliefs. And I think we're probably realizing more and more it absolutely does affect their behavior and how they treat other people. Matter of fact, if it didn't, I don't think they'd be so staunch in it.
Judged and can never be fully good on your own. That kind of thinking doesn't inspire growth. It breeds helplessness. It traps people in cycles of shame and dependence. And it doesn't end in the mind. It shows up in behavior. People start avoiding certain friendships, denying themselves harmless pleasures, and policing their thoughts. All because they believe their desires are evil. That kind of suppression often leads to emotional breakdowns or explosive behavior later. Human nature doesn't disappear just because you label it sinful. In some extreme cases, people have been known to mutilate themselves, starve themselves, or live in isolation to purify their souls. That's not spiritual strength. That's self-harm justified by belief. And yet, throughout history, these actions were praised as holy. Saints who bled for faith. Martyrs who gave up everything. But if someone today said they wanted to suffer to please an invisible force, most psychologists would call that delusional. It's all...
Yeah, even fasting. And honestly, I think a lot of people fast for weight loss and just pretend that it's religious. I fast because I originally got into intermittent fasting way back when I used to listen to Joe Rogan. Whew, my God. All right, time to cancel this channel. I'm just going to burn the whole YouTube down. But, you know, it's like, whatever. If you want to fast, then fast. But the idea of fasting for religious devotion is sickening. Again, you just have some God that demands that you starve yourself from sunup to sundown. If, like, okay, whatever.
Also worth noting how religion often discourages seeking help outside the belief system. People are told to pray instead of seeing a therapist.
There you go.
To read scripture instead of taking medication. To trust a spiritual leader instead of a doctor. That isolation from real solutions is dangerous. Mental illness thrives in silence. And religion, at its worst, creates exactly that environment, where speaking up is seen as weakness and questioning is seen as rebellion. Even community support can become a trap. The love and acceptance people feel in religious groups often come with a condition. You must believe. If you stop believing, that same community can turn cold. People lose friends, family, even their identities. This isn't just disagreement. It's emotional blackmail. That kind of pressure causes deep mental stress. It keeps people trapped, not by chains, but by the fear of rejection. Some defenders of religion argue that it gives people comfort, that it helps them cope. But so do illusions. Just because something feels good doesn't make it true. And in many cases, the comfort is shallow. It's the kind of comfort that tells people not to think too hard, not to ask too many questions, and not to challenge authority.
Okay, this is where things get very interesting. Yeah, part of the problem is we've privileged their comfort. And in reality, I think a huge part of it is absolutely dominion. It's absolutely the power structures in our society and how these religions have been engaged in reinforcing that power structure. In other words, Christianity would not be the dominant delusion in the West if not for it being the religion of the white supremacist colonial empire. And you could say the same thing for parts of the Middle East that are dominated by Islam. It's absolutely the conquest of the region and, you know, the religion of the people who did that, being the religion that's been able to maintain a stranglehold on power throughout history. But it's at a point where it's like the rest of us have surrendered our autonomy because it gives them comfort. I can't say churches should pay taxes because that's anti-Christian discrimination, and you know, your aunt really wants to see grandma again in heaven. Part of, again, the problem with people who have these issues is, again, their lack of empathy. We're going to keep coming back to it because that's the message we have to keep trying to drive home about why these people are different, y'all.
Yeah.
And so they are absolutely putting fairy tales that comfort them over the reality of how the institutions they support have oppressed other people. And that is absolutely how they get away with their entitlement and lack of humanity towards others. Oh, well, I'm just a sweet old person, and I can't deal with the idea that I'm going to die someday. I deal with the fact that dead people are actually dead. I can't deal with the fact that I'm not going to see my dog again. So I'm, so don't challenge me. Don't tell me I'm wrong. Don't take this from me. If you take this from me, you're being a really big bad meanie, right? That is absolutely how they dominate against other people. And it is abusive. I do feel that the rest of us are being used and abused by these people. It's just we haven't been given the tools to recognize it. And therefore we have not been able to disengage ourselves properly from these people. But I'm basically suggesting we need to, in a lot of these people, you go low contact if you have to, no contact if you can. And that's the reason, is because it's a dysfunctional relationship. Of course, this person puts themselves above others, and there's a lack of empathy, and that will hurt you. That will cause harm to you. So it is very interesting, the way the comfort issue gets weaponized on a societal level, that then allows these people to just, again, get away with these crazy beliefs.
That's not peace of mind. That's psychological sedation. It's true that not all believers suffer mental harm, but the system itself encourages irrational thinking, emotional suppression, and dependency on invisible power. And when you zoom out and look at the traits, delusions, paranoia, compulsive behavior, emotional instability, you start to see a pattern that's hard to ignore. Religion isn't just about belief, it's about identity. And when an identity is built on unquestionable authority, invisible punishment, and moral black and white thinking, it begins to resemble something pathological. Not in the sense that believers are sick, but in the sense that the system itself operates like a psychological condition. What's more disturbing is how society protects it. If
There
one
it
person
is.
believes the end of the world is near because of divine prophecy, they might be hospitalized. But if 1 million people believe it,
There it
they
is.
build a church.
Wow.
That's the power of numbers. Mass belief doesn't make an idea sane, it just makes it harder to challenge. And this isn't about attacking individuals, it's about recognizing that some systems, even if widespread, are not healthy. Some ideas, even if ancient, are not wise. And some traditions, even if comforting, are not safe. If we saw a friend spiraling into obsessive behavior, talking to voices, afraid to think freely, and dependent on rituals to feel clean, we'd want to help them. But when religion creates the same symptoms, we call it devotion. That's the double standard. And it's time to question it. Because if a system causes anxiety, fear, guilt, identity confusion, emotional suppression, and a disconnect from reality, we have to stop calling it sacred. We have to start calling it what it is. And maybe the real breakthrough comes when we're brave enough to say it out loud. That religion, in many ways, isn't just wrong. It's harmful. That it's not just outdated, it's psychologically dangerous. And that until we recognize that, we'll keep mistaking the symptoms for spirituality. And the illness will keep spreading.
Yeah, that's the tough part for me. Like, is I feel like if I had any interest in any of this, it would have been breaking the cycle of indoctrination, particularly in my own family. And I think now seeing my younger cousins, a bunch of them get hyper religious and realizing they're going to be starting their own families if they haven't already, and indoctrinating them. It feels like I've largely failed at that, and shift my focus to what I can do outside the family. But yeah, it does sort of suck to see all this happening in real time. Yeah.
Let me. You mentioned Chat GTP or GPT. I don't know what it's called. Can you go to their website and type in the question, why is religion not considered a mental illness?
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah, this is like the thing me and Lena were doing. Why is my keyboard acting like this? All right.
God.
No, I'll get there.
Probably not.
Probably not. All right. Why isn't religion considered a mental illness? All right, let's I guess we could no, hang on. I should do this over here. All right. Okay. I don't know how much better that is for people out there, but I try to make it big. Religion is not considered a mental illness because it does not meet the criteria used by mental health professionals to define mental disorders. One, the definition of mental illness. Mental illnesses are clinically significant disturbances in an individual's cognition, emotional regulation, or behavior that reflect dysfunction in psychological, biological, developmental processes. Diagnoses are made using standardized manuals like the DSM-5 or ICD-11. International Classification of Diseases. Religion is a cultural and social phenomenon. Religion is a widespread, socially shared belief system and often provides a sense of meaning, purpose, community, moral guidance, and coping mechanisms. Belief in a higher power, engagement in rituals, or acceptance of supernatural explanations is normative within cultural context and is not inherently pathological. Cultural context matters. A belief is not a delusion if it is shared by a group and is culturally sanctioned.
No.
Keep going.
Well, wait.
Go ahead.
Okay. Well, we could go to the Old Testament and take this to a level of ridiculousness just by looking at some of the things that they believed, And
Yeah,
the
yeah,
guy
we
is
could.
hoping that he can, when he's, hey, I can breed striped goats by letting goats have sex in front of sticks. No, that's not what's at work there.
Right.
That's not. But if you want to believe that, you're just going to be mistaken. It's probably not going to cause much harm. But
Yeah, yeah.
there are beliefs that did. There are beliefs that got people unalive.
Mm-hmm. 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 All right. So, yeah, for example, believing in prayer and divine intervention is not a clinical delusion, it's part of a mainstream religious tradition. Mental health criteria intentionally exclude culturally normative beliefs, even if they seem irrational to outsiders. Functionality and distress are key. Mental illnesses usually involve impairment in daily life, distress, or harm to oneself or others. Religious belief does not inherently cause these outcomes. Many people function well and even thrive within religious frameworks. In fact, studies show that for some individuals, religious involvement can be protective for mental health, reducing anxiety, depression, and substance abuse. Only specific expressions may be pathological. Sometimes religious ideation can interact with mental illness, for example, in cases of religious delusions and schizophrenia or scrupulosity, a form of OCD focused on moral religious purity, or manic episodes involving grandiose religious identity. But these are not indictments of religion as a whole. They are clinical symptoms that are judged based on context, distress, and impairment, not the content alone. Religion not classified as a mental illness because it's culturally shared, socially sanctioned system of belief, does not inherently cause distress or dysfunction. Mental health frameworks are built to respect cultural diversity and avoid pathologizing normative beliefs. If you like, we can explore how mental health professionals navigate the boundary between religion and psychopathy in clinical practice. All right, I have thoughts. Where'd you want to start though? This is good.
Well, it's so I phrased my question slightly different. Why is religion not considered a mental illness? Our answers are not identical. They're a bit different. So let's stick with what you have there. I'll try to give you a little bit of a
Okay.
direction here. Um, Context. Context matters. Culturally accepted beliefs are not pathological. Um, so how does it phrase that for you right at the when it talks about context?
They're just talking about because it's a cultural and social phenomenon and it is part of a mainstream religious tradition. So I and again, like I think this is interesting and boring. Here's what I mean by that. No, the exercise is this is fun. This is definitely interesting. What I mean by that when I talk about the responses is it's interesting to me to have the bigger conversation about is something a mental illness, because you want to talk about how it functions. You want to talk about the behavior it produces. You want to talk about what it's going on. Essentially, in this community, coping. I hate to say it, we want to talk about what it's like to live with these people and have to deal with these people, and what it's like to be
Hmm.
in relationship with these people or societal contract with these people. That's what we really want to talk about, right?
Hmm.
And so then that's interesting because you have to then get into the details. Okay, the flip side is, are we talking about, is it a mental illness or is it considered a mental illness? And hopefully for people that tuned in earlier, like we established up front, we already know it's not diagnosed as a mental illness, right? Um,
Hmm.
and so in a sense, then the question of why isn't it, that you're sort of skipping over, should it be or could it be under different circumstances? Rather, instead, we're just saying we already know it isn't. Okay, let's talk about why it's not. And so that's what I meant was when I said it's boring. It's like, well, we already know it's not. But this is what
Hmm.
I was talking about earlier that I think is worth sharing. Notice how it did not. If I asked, notice how it did not say there are no delusions involved, or it did not say, there's no there's no reason that you would even consider right. It instead it gave us context, right? It gave us, oh well, it's normative culturally and socially. Okay, you're still not telling me it isn't a delusion. You're just telling me it's a very popular delusion again, and that's what people say. We say religion is the acceptable form of crazy. Nothing in this would refute that. Matter of fact, what they're saying is, yeah, technically we don't consider it crazy because it's socially acceptable. Okay, thank you. You're literally confirming what we said, right? And then even the functionality and distress are key. This is to me baby's mental health 101. Yes, dysfunction and distress are key. So for instance, how do you know if X habit is an addiction versus just something you like to do a lot versus just a healthy once in a while, whatever? Usually we use functionality and distress. Is it affecting your ability to hold down a job? Is it affecting your ability to have a healthy relationship with your partner and raise your child? And be a functioning member of society? If the answer is to all those questions is typically no, you're good to go. And when it becomes yes to too many of them, we say maybe we need to get some treatment here. Okay, but that does not fully encompass our understanding of mental health. So for instance, you can think about a person who is very well adjusted, incredibly empathetic, smart, mature, responsible, got their together, okay? But their mindset is a mess. They just don't necessarily feel good about themselves or whatever. Okay, is that person fine just because everything's fine? Most of us would say not necessarily.
No, not necessarily.
Right? Although maybe, right, there's a healthy degree of, hey, I just don't think I'm all that great, but yeah, not necessarily. And the same thing would be true of a person who is abusive, manipulative, hurts others, exploits others, but thinks everything is fine. Says, no, actually, I'm a respected member of my community. I make a lot of money. I have a great sex life. I travel. I do what I want. Everything's great. Are we going to say they're necessarily fine? No, not necessarily, right? And also with certain types of disorders, people can be very high functioning, particularly personality disorders, particularly conditions like narcissistic personality disorder, because there's a mask, there's a false self, right? And a lot of times that false self projects strength, beauty, smarts, humility, kindness, grace, everything. But then if you happen to be in an intimate relationship with that person or that person's child or the person who's the victim of when the mask slips, you know that absolutely is a fake person. And part of what horrifies you is recognizing like, oh my goodness, I'm literally part of what these do is people isolate certain relationships. You realize oh my goodness, I'm dealing with a person that is completely different from the way the rest of the world sees and knows this person. So we know, especially in that church environment, which again, if it was really going to get nuanced, it would tell us church culture itself produces the mask. People put the mask on Sunday morning. They literally wear their Sunday best. Right. And they everything's good. Everything's fine. You're happy to be in the house. They're singing, they're dancing. Okay. So we know that a person may be disordered, may have, mental health that's completely divorced from reality, but it's not necessarily causing them distress, or it's not necessarily interfering with their ability to be a high functioning person in every other area of their life. So again, it's very interesting that it goes there instead of saying that they don't have the symptoms. Instead, it's like, well, we're just not sure in all cases that it's really disruptive enough. And again, that's informative for the rest of us. Yes, this is why you know, this does help you understand why it's not considered a mental illness or whatever like that on the technical level, to the point of it goes in the DSM and we diagnose it, right? But again, the more functional issue to me is, what is living with these people like? What is different about the way they behave? And if you look at what the religion produces or how it influences that behavior, then you end up where the video is, which is like, yes, this is an inherently disordered manifestation. And whether it's diagnosable or not, to me, almost becomes irrelevant, especially because, again, who's going to go say, hey, I think there's something wrong with me, I'm a Christian? Like, that's wild.
Yeah, something's got to give.
Sumami said, I mean, it is infantile. Yes, like a child unable to deal with death. Yeah. That's that part. But again,
I gotta get going.
Yeah, we do.
Let's
We
wrap
do.
it
It's
up.
after 3. It's after 3. All right. Look, y'all, this has been fun. It's been a great conversation. Thanks to everybody in the chat.
Yes,
Thanks to everybody that watches later. Please like the video, subscribe to the channel if you're not already. Leave us a comment later. I do think me and Maya have something planned for tomorrow night. So look out for that. Also got some content coming out on Michael Beverly's channel, so make sure you're subscribed over there. Thank you guys all so much for tuning in. Thanks again to the mods for holding everything down. Love you guys so much, and be good to yourselves
and each other.
All right, gang, we'll see you